You have seen the photograph. Everyone has. A triangle of limestone rising out of flat desert, sharp-edged against a sky that has not changed in 4,500 years. You probably filed it somewhere in your brain under ancient mystery, somewhere between Stonehenge and Atlantis. Impressive. Inexplicable. Something you accept without understanding. Here is the thing. The Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest structure on Earth for 3,800 years. 38 centuries. It was not surpassed until 1311 AD, when a cathedral spire went up in Lincoln, England. And even then, historians argue about the math. We know almost exactly how the Egyptians built it. Not because we guessed. Because they left the receipts. This is not a mystery. It never was. The pyramid is not the product of alien intervention or lost technology or a civilization so advanced we cannot comprehend it. It is the product of something far stranger and far more impressive than any of those explanations. It is the product of human beings who solved an engineering problem the hard way, with their bodies, their minds, and a logistics system so precise that modern supply chain analysts have studied it with genuine admiration. What the pyramids actually say about ancient humans is not how advanced were they. It is how organized, how motivated, and how brutally effective were they. And that answer should shake you. Let's start with what you are actually looking at. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. The average block weighs 2.5 tons. The heaviest blocks, the granite slabs inside the burial chamber, hauled from Aswan, 800 kilometers south, weigh 80 tons each. The entire structure is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees. Not magnetic north. True north. Using nothing but stars, shadow sticks, and geometry that predates Greek mathematics by more than 1,000 years. The base covers 53,000 square meters. You could fit the cathedrals of Florence, Milan, St. Peter's in Rome, Westminster Abbey, and St. Paul's Cathedral in London inside the footprint, combined, with room left over. This is not a building. It is a precision instrument made of 6 million tons of stone. Here is where every assumption you just formed has to be thrown out. The story you were probably told is slaves. Thousands of enslaved people whipped across desert sand under the boots of Egyptian taskmasters, building monuments to a god-king who did not see them as human. That is not what happened. That is not even close to what happened. In 1990, a construction worker's horse broke through the ground near the pyramids and fell into a tomb. Accidental archaeology. What excavators found inside changed the scholarly consensus permanently. The tombs belonged to the pyramid builders. They were not slaves. They had names carved into stone. They had titles. They had dedicated burial grounds, which in ancient Egypt meant they had standing, status, and identity. Slaves were not buried with names. Slaves were not buried at all. Archaeologist Mark Leaner, who has spent 4 decades excavating Giza, found evidence of a workforce organized into gangs with their own identities. Gang names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure were scratched onto pyramid stones by the workers themselves. That is not the behavior of enslaved labor. That is the behavior of people who had unit pride. Leaner's team also excavated the workers' village. They found bakeries, breweries, and a medical facility. The bones recovered from the workers' cemetery show healed fractures, spines that were broken and survived, legs that were set and recovered. The state was healing these people, maintaining them, because they were not expendable. The workforce was rotating. Approximately 20,000 to 30,000 workers at peak construction, recruited from across Egypt, fed, housed, and given beer, the Egyptian equivalent of a meal allowance, by the state. Here is the thing. The pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by citizens doing state labor in exchange for food, medical care, and burial rites. By Egyptian standards, it was not a bad deal. Here is where it gets genuinely complicated, because the labor question was always secondary. The real question, the one that engineers and archaeologists have argued over for a century, is mechanical. How do you move a 2.5-ton block across desert sand without a wheel? For a long time, the answer was assumed: brute force and ramps. Build an enormous earthen ramp. Drag the blocks up it on wooden sleds. Simple. Obvious. Wrong, or at least incomplete. Here is the crack in that explanation. A single external ramp long enough and gradual enough to reach the pyramid's full height would have required more material than the pyramid itself. It would have been the largest construction project in ancient history, to build the infrastructure to build the other infrastructure. The math does not work. So Egyptologists looked harder. In 2018, a team working in the alabaster quarries at Hatnub, 400 kilometers from Giza, in the middle of the eastern desert, found something that rewrote the physics. A ramp system. But not the kind anyone expected. It was a central staircase ramp, with 2 staircases on either side, and wooden post holes along the edges. The posts held ropes. This was not a drag and push system. This was a pulley and haul system. Workers above pulled ropes over wooden posts, while workers below pushed. The same block could be moved with a fraction of the manpower previously calculated. The system was steep. Much steeper than anyone thought ancient Egyptians could manage. And that steepness was the point. It meant the ramp could be short, localized, and reused rather than a single vast inclined plane that consumed the entire work site. The quarry at Hatnub dates to the reign of Khufu. The same pharaoh. The same generation. Not a coincidence. But moving stone is only half the problem. Getting stone to the right place, in the right sequence, at the right time, across a construction site covering 53,000 square meters, that is the other half. And here is where the ancient Egyptians do something that stops modern analysts cold. In 2013, archaeologists found the Diary of Mir, a papyrus scroll buried at the port of Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast. It is the oldest known papyrus document in the world. And it is a work log. Mira was an inspector, a middle manager. He ran a team of approximately 200 workers, whose job was to transport limestone blocks from the quarries at Tura, across the Nile to Giza. The diary covers 3 months of that operation with the kind of operational specificity you would find in a modern shipping manifest. Departure dates, arrival dates, block counts, weather notes, personnel records, supervisor sign-offs. The operation he describes was not improvised. It was a supply chain. Dedicated canals were cut to move barges directly to the pyramid site. Harbors were built. The entire logistics network, canals, waterways, unloading ramps, was engineered as a system, not assembled as an afterthought. What this means is staggering. The Egyptians were not just managing a construction project. They were managing a living supply chain across hundreds of kilometers of river and desert, coordinating thousands of workers, with no computers, no GPS, no radio communication, and no steel. They were doing it with papyrus, couriers, and a bureaucratic structure that would not look out of place in a modern construction firm. Here is what should stay with you. The engineers who built the Great Pyramid did not have wheels when construction began. The wheel was known in Mesopotamia, but the archaeological record suggests early Egyptians used sledges and rocking techniques to move stone, choosing control over speed. They invented their own solutions to problems the wheel alone could not solve. The workers who hauled those blocks across sand in 120-degree heat were not anonymous. They had nicknames. They had unit pride. They scratched their gang names onto stones that would be buried under the pyramid for 4,500 years, never to be read by a living person. They wrote those names anyway. That is not the behavior of people who did not understand what they were building. That is the behavior of people who were proud of it. Modern construction of the Empire State Building took 410 days, with steel, cranes, elevators, and electrical lighting. The Great Pyramid took approximately 20 years. But the Empire State Building used 60,000 tons of steel fabricated in factories across an industrialized continent. The Egyptians did it with limestone, copper chisels, wooden sledges, rope, water, papyrus, and human beings who were well-fed and apparently fairly motivated. We look at the pyramids and feel something we usually call awe. But underneath the awe, if you are honest, is an assumption that the people who built them were operating at the edge of what was possible for them. That they were reaching beyond their natural capabilities and somehow, miraculously succeeding. Here is the actual story. Because it is not the one you know. The Egyptians were not at the edge of their capabilities. They were operating comfortably within them. The pyramid was not a miracle. It was a project. A managed, budgeted, staffed, supplied, and inspected project with paperwork. The miracle is not that they built it. The miracle is that 4,500 years later, people who can build anything, with computers, satellites, industrial machinery, and a global supply chain, look at a pile of rocks in the desert and still cannot fully explain exactly how it was done. Not because the Egyptians were superhuman. Because they were human in a way we have forgotten to take seriously. Drop your country in the comments. Right now, before you forget. Because this video is going to reach people in places the ancient Egyptians never mapped, and I want to see how far the story traveled. And subscribe, not for the algorithm, not for me. For the version of you that comes back here in 3 weeks looking for the next one. The people who don't bother are the same ones who find this channel 6 months later and wish they'd been here from the start. You already know which one you are. They did not build the pyramid in spite of being ancient. They built it because they were already, fully, irreversibly, and without apology, human. The same species that would one day land on the moon first learned to move a 2.5-ton block of limestone with a rope, a wooden post, and enough workers who were proud enough of the work to sign their names to it. That is not where the story ends. That is where it started.